You might need MIDI if you ever hairsprayed your bangs into a waterfall, layered slouch socks, tied a scrunchie to the bottom corner of your t-shirt, or tried to go for a run with a CD player. If this took you down memory lane, you might need MIDI. Perimenopause can start 10 years before you actually go through menopause. So for some women, that can be as early as 35. Nobody ever told you that? Well, nobody told us either. That's why we built MIDI. If you're experiencing symptoms like night sweats, weight gain, or just generally don't feel like yourself anymore, you may be in perimenopause. But here's some good news. With the right care, these symptoms are treatable. Book a virtual visit with a menopause specialist at MIDI. Visit joinmidi.com to schedule with an expert who gets it. Specialist-led care, virtual visits, insurance eligible. Midlife needs MIDI. Results may vary. Medications prescribed only if clinically appropriate based on a consultation with a clinician. Insurance coverage varies. Check with your plan for coverage.
Summer is here. At Orderly Meds, we know this time is a reminder that life is full of new beginnings. Whether you're celebrating the nice weather, starting a new chapter, planning a vacation, or simply looking ahead to what's next, this season can be the perfect time to invest in yourself and your health. If you've struggled with weight loss and are curious about GLP-1 medications, Orderly Meds can help you learn about your options. Through a simple virtual process, you can connect with licensed medical professionals who can determine whether treatment may be appropriate for you. Getting started is fast, convenient, and happens online from the comfort of home. This summer, consider a new approach to feeling your best. Visit orderlymeds.com/podcast to learn more. That's orderlymeds.com/podcast. orderlymeds.com/podcast. Because every new season is an opportunity to take the next step forward. Compounded medications are not FDA approved. Eligibility required and determined by a licensed provider. Individual results may vary. See website for details.
This is episode 428 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, I'm Helen Ostovich, Professor Emerita of English and Cultural Studies at McMaster University. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare
Welcome
Life.
to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream, Puck has a line that says, "And now they never meet in grove or green, by fountain clear or spangled starlight sheen." In Taming of the Shrew, Petruchio uses this same language again by saying, "What stars do spangle heaven with such beauty?" In a similar description, again from Midsummer, Lysander says, "Fair Helena, who more engilds the night than all you fiery O's and eyes of light." If you're not familiar with engilding the night, as Lysander says, that is a word that means to make things bright, often referred to a golden light. It's been around since the 15th century, and what all of these references have in common is that they're talking about making something shiny. And in Shakespeare's England, the best way to make anything you might like to make shiny look glittered was to attach to it what's called a spangle, or an O, spelled O-E. Essentially, these were early modern sequins. Some surviving examples of 17th century spangles were discovered in Jamestown, Virginia, and are housed inside the collections at Jamestown Rediscovery, which jointly manages historic Jamestown along with the National Park Service. One of the curators involved in that project, Janine Johnston, is here with us today to explain how spangles worked in the 17th century, the history of the ones they found there in Virginia, and what the surviving artifacts reveal about spangles from Shakespeare's lifetime. Janine Johnston is a curator with Jamestown Rediscovery. She holds a master's in historical archaeology, and as a curator, she's part of the team responsible for processing, cataloging, and caring for more than 5 million artifacts excavated at Jamestown. In her role, Janine has analyzed some of the dress accessories, including spangles and 17th century buttons. The former is the subject of a forthcoming publication for the International Journal of Historical Archaeology. Her current research is on arms and armor found at Jamestown, from late 16th century armor, edged weapons, and firearms through artifacts dating to the 20th century. You can find out more about Janine and Jamestown Rediscovery in the links for the show notes in today's episode. Stay tuned for the URL for where to find more. Don't forget, as you're listening to our show today, that you can see visual images of the artifacts that we're talking about, along with paintings and other resources that go into the research of today's episode right now inside That Shakespeare Society. You can scroll through all of these extras by being a member of our show. To join the conversation and scroll through the extras while you listen today, visit our episode companion page at CassidyCash.com/episode 428. That's CassidyCash.com/EP427. Look for the Patreon buttons and That Shakespeare Society. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Janine. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
So tell us about the Spangles that are there at Jamestown Rediscovery. Where and how were the Spangles we're discussing today actually found?
Great question. The Spangles, or also known as O's at Jamestown, were found in a variety of features, and we actually have a few different types of the Spangles. All of the different types are primarily found during the Company period of Jamestown, so that's when Jamestown is under the control of the Virginia Company of London between 1607 and 1624. In 1624, the company loses its charter and King James makes Virginia a crown colony. So we do have a few Spangles that pop up in our mid-17th century context, like 1630s to 60s, but they're always in like trash pits, so they could have been used earlier as well. In terms of how they're found, we mostly find loose single spangles. Textiles don't typically survive well archaeologically, so that's due to hydrolysis, insect, microbial attack, and it really depends on the textile material and the environmental conditions that they're found in. Despite the fact that the metals themselves that the spangles are made up of tend to survive in pretty good shape, we usually just find a couple in each feature. This could be because they're being dropped as they're being worn. It could be that they are missed because they're so small. Our kind of traditional screen size when sieving dirt is about 1/4 inch. So those tiny little spangles are going to fall through. That being said, when we excavate certain features like wells or trash pits, we do tend to use a finer mesh, so they're more likely to be caught. But it's also just the nature of archaeology that you're not going to find very many things in whole pieces.
So it's pretty exceptional, these that you have there in your collection, that they're even there.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. They're so tiny.
Give us a sense of the definition of tiny. Like, okay, let's take a pencil eraser on the end of like a number 2 pencil. How does it compare in size to that?
I would say that most of them are probably about the same diameter as the end of that pencil eraser. Some of them are even smaller than that. I don't think there's any that are any bigger for the Spangles, but yeah, they're all vaguely that size. So we have about 15 loose teardrop-shaped Spangles from, again, the Company period. The other 2 varieties that we have can kind of be combined into one type, which are more round circular discs. We have 25 of those, and they're mostly loose, but there are a couple of examples where they're twisted up in metal wires and threads. And there's actually a set of about 15 of those that were found in one pit feature. And those are also twisted up in some copper wire. So those are probably part of the same object and probably part of stump work, which is essentially a type of raised embroidery, typically used for decorative, non-functional purposes. However, the most intact artifact we have with Spangles is what we call the captain's sash. The sash was excavated in association with one of the 4 burials in the chancel of the 1608 church. And it was excavated in a block of dirt, x-rayed, taken to Cornell for micro CT scanning, and that scanning revealed layers of a folded sash that's fringed with spangles. So costume historians, textile experts from the Colonial Williamsburg, as well as the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Museum of London, confirmed that this is a type of ceremonial sash with a bullion fringe. And ceremonial sashes like these would be typically associated with high-ranking military officers, and it's got just dozens and dozens of those teardrop spangles on them.
So William Shakespeare, we've read about how he actually wore a ceremonial sash when he marched in the coronation parade for James I. I would love to know if that kind of sash is similar to this captain's sash. Would that have been something like, would Shakespeare's ceremonial sash have had spangles on it? What a lovely question that might be to explore.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it probably did. They're so shiny and bright.
Yeah, whenever you
Yeah.
needed some pomp and
Yeah.
circumstance,
Yeah.
spangles were there to help you.
Absolutely. Yes, they're so shiny.
How do we know that the spangles that have been uncovered at Jamestown are English made spangles and not from the native tribes in the area at this time?
Great question. The materials that they're made of aren't as prevalent in the local indigenous groups at the time. There is trade happening between the two groups, and some of that does involve the metals involved. But the best kind of evidence we have is the fact that these spangles are being made and used over in England in the same way. So, the comparison there is enough to say.
What kinds of metals were used to make spangles, and did they come in various shapes? I mean, are all spangles, a circle, or did we have squares or triangles or other kinds of spangles to work with?
Right. So in terms of shape, there are two different shapes in our collection. There are teardrop spangles, which are, as the name implies, and then we have kind of round circular disc ones. One of our senior conservators, Dr. Chris Wilkins, and I have actually been doing elemental analysis on some of our spangles, so I can tell you exactly what they're made of. The teardrop ones are primarily silver. A couple of them are showing little hints of gold, but they're primarily silver, whereas the round ones are more likely to be copper alloy, but have little hints of silver in them. We think they were probably silvered to make them appear to be silver, a more expensive material type. We do have a couple of the circular ones that are silver that have been gilded. So there's been gold that has been added to them. The kinds we have are made in two different ways. So the teardrop shaped ones were actually stamped out of a thin sheet of silver, and then the hole that they would be dangling with is punched through individually afterwards. And I have seen evidence of or reference to of the desired shape, punched out of the desired shape. So far, both in extant garments and our own spangles, I have only seen the teardrop shaped ones. I did see a reference to some 18th century things that add a couple more shapes, but in the 17th century, I have only seen teardrop. The round circular ones were actually made by wrapping a metallic wire around a dowel, and then they cut a line straight down that wire, and then they hammer all the resulting rings flat. So it actually looks like a circle, but if you look closer, it's more like a circle with a kind of butted end because of that cut. So those are the kinds.
So a lot of sort of intricate steps involved here in making not only spangles, but different kinds of spangles. Was this an expensive process? Were spangles considered an expensive item to decorate with?
They actually aren't as expensive as you would think. I saw at least two, maybe three references during my research to spangles being very cheap to make, very cheap to produce, just because of, I guess they're so small and the kind of intricacies that you can do with them. But they would be primarily on more expensive garments, but they are also a way for people to give the appearance of wealth, even if they don't necessarily have the wealth.
I want spangles to be, I guess, because they're associated with sequins and glitter and being dressed up in a fancy occasion. That's definitely where our modern mind goes to. But if they weren't expensive to make, then it kind of, I don't know where it fits in terms of Jamestown, because I know when we think about 17th century English settlers in this area, we think of Jamestown being populated by families or entrepreneurs or, even like hunters, or anyway, they were coming over to Jamestown in an escape kind of way, and they were putting together housing from what they could find in the land. It doesn't track with me that they would need to feel like they needed to make sequins and have them as part of their existence. Can you explain for us what sequins are doing here in Jamestown?
Yeah, absolutely. Even though they are cheap to make, they are going to be primarily on those garments or accessories of the wealthy. But Jamestown has a lot of very contradictory artifacts like this. There is a plethora of Chinese porcelain vessels, and Chinese porcelain at this time is only just becoming available to England, and thus is only available to the upper echelon of society. And yet we have well over 100, probably a couple hundred Chinese porcelain vessels. In fact, we are one of our senior curators, Murray Outlaw, give a little plug here, just wrote a book on the Chinese porcelain in our collection. And if you have any listeners in the Williamsburg region, there's an exhibit at Jamestown Settlement that is a cooperation between our two organizations on that Chinese porcelain. And they were able to get loans of materials from multiple places in England, including a bottle from King Charles's collection. And the only other he actually has a set of two, but the only other known example of this specific bottle is in the Jamestown collection. So that's a lot.
So extremely cutting edge culture that you're uncovering there.
Yes,
fascinating.
Essentially, a number of the early century colonists, 17th century colonists at Jamestown, are second sons of gentlemen soldiers, or they are associated with more high status individuals. So, for instance, George Percy, who is an early settler and also a later governor, he is the youngest son of the 8th Earl of Northumberland. And during his time as governor, he received goods, quote unquote, fitting of his office. And so there's inventories of those. And one thing that kind of sticks out there is one of his suits has gold buttons, but also people connected. So like Sir Thomas Dale, he is sponsored by Robert Cecil, the first Earl of Salisbury, one of the Queen's favored gentlemen. But yeah, we have a lot of artifacts in the collection that show kind of that incongruous lifestyle where you have high status elite items in a swampy island where even survival is kind of a major struggle. Even before starving time, the mortality rate is at like 85% or something like that. But we see it in our ceramics like the porcelain, we see it in arms and armor, and we see it in dress accessories, including the spangles. But also we have goffering irons that would have been used on those rough collars, and you don't need that in Virginia. But the appearance is
gasp. Gasp. So many 17th century women are rolling in their graves at the moment. Of course we need our Elizabethan ruffs. What are you thinking?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so very British. Even in the middle of the wilderness, we must be proper. There are rules to how you must dress.
Absolutely.
Can you tell from how these spangles were found as to whether or not they're representative of how they would have been used back in England during the same time period? Or are these artifacts reflective of what was going on back in London at the same time, for example?
Yeah, to an extent, yes. Of course, we have a bunch of loose ones, so who knows where those are coming from. But the best example, again, is the sash. So the spangles on that would have dangled from the fringe to catch the light. And while this time period doesn't see a lot of clothing in burials or even burial goods, there are certain items that depict status, such as the sash, or we have a couple of burials with captain's staffs in them that are recovered. And to be clear, it doesn't appear that the individual was wearing the sash. It appears that it was kind of tucked into the coffin, folded up next to him. But yeah, so that's an indication of, again, status and rank in this case. There are other spangles, especially the round ones that are twisted up in the wire. Those are part of stump work, which I mentioned earlier, but it's a 3D embroidery method, and that would have been purely non-functional. But we don't know what that stump work is associated with. So yes,
so
and
it was something decorative, but we don't know quite where that would have been placed. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
When spangles were attached to a garment, I'm assuming they were sewn onto the fabric, but tell us about the logistics of using a spangle in making clothes. How many spangles, for example, were typical on a single garment?
Right. Some of them are sewn into in the same way embroidery would be. So the round ones specifically are sewn in to appear flat on the textile, but they can also dangle. So again, for our purposes, those teardrop shaped ones are intended to dangle. They are not intended to be kind of sewn into the fabric. I don't know, I actually say that, but I'm not sure if that's a completely accurate assessment. The ones that I've seen on extant garments for the research at Jamestown is that's how it seems to be divided. In terms of how many would be typical for a garment, I'm not sure. We don't really find them archaeologically intact, but on the pieces that I have seen in museum collections, there would appear to be hundreds, maybe 100. It kind of depends on the garment too, because you're looking at something like a glove, that's a lot smaller than a full
I
jacket.
imagine it depends a lot on your patience level too, and your
Yes.
eyesight, because you're
Yes.
got to do this highly intricate, one at a time.
Yeah.
That would be incredible. Are there any 17th century records that show us spangles being used for something other than clothing? I mean, I know you mentioned the sash, but I'm wondering if they decorated with spangles, especially around the holidays. I would think that you would want to make things shiny, but do we have records that prove this out one way or the other?
Yeah, I'm not sure about documentary records and paintings because I haven't really needed to look into those as much. But there are definitely extant museum pieces that show their use in pillows, on panels, frames, on caskets or small boxes. And in fact, the small boxes, that's one of the things that our stump work could be used in. So we actually have a researcher who's looking into all of our stump work right now, including the one with spangles. And caskets is one of the options, but one of them seems to be very similar to bed hangings that she's found. We cannot say that
That
there were bed
makes
hangings
sense.
at Jamestown
Okay.
at this point, but yeah, it could be. And then yeah, I mentioned other dress accessories as well, so things like gloves, caps, purses, and you can even get multiple types of spangles on a single item. So there's one really beautiful women's jacket, but also some gloves that have instances where you can see the round spangle kind of sewn into, but also like a fringe, metal fringe that has the teardrop ones dangling. So those are really fun
Anytime you
pieces.
needed something to be a little shiny,
Yes.
I
Just
love
add
it.
it in.
Just
Yeah.
throw it in there.
Yeah.
From your work into this topic, if we're new to exploring spangles or O's, we should mention they're also sometimes called
Yes.
O's.
Also
But
your
if
hose.
we are new to this branch of history and we want to explore it further, what are some of your recommended resources you would say, okay, start with these if you want to learn more about this history?
Yeah, it depends on what specific aspect you are, but some of my favorites, some of which I just discovered, there is a conservation master's project by Susan Savelli from 2018 that looks at metal threads from I believe it's a shipwreck, but it's a collection that's in the Rijksmuseum. And she goes into how the metallic threads were made, and that includes the round spangles and how they're made. And she's got lovely little diagrams in there that actually visually show you if you're a visual learner. And then there's also a book by Susan Vincent called Dressing the Elite, Clothing in Early Modern England. That doesn't necessarily talk about spangles, but it gives a great deeper insight into how clothing and fashions shaped identity, status, society. There's also a really great book by Avril Hart and Susan North, lots of Susans, called Fashion in Detail from the 17th and 18th centuries. And this one has a lot of really, really great high quality and zoomed in photos from the Victorian and Albert Museum. It does have a section on spangles, but even just the rest of it is really wonderful to see. And then I just have two more. I mentioned Chris and I are working on a elemental analysis that's going to be an internal report that we will turn into a blog. So it's not published yet, but if you keep an eye out on our website, theoretically it will be there this year. And then
Fantastic.
yes, the final thing is just I love looking at online museum collections at
Doesn't
the
everyone?
extant pieces. Yes, as you should. And the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Rijksmuseum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they all have really, really beautiful examples of them.
That's exciting. No, it's one of the things I think I love best about it being the 21st century and living in the time we do at the moment is that there are so many more
Mhm.
online databases where you can literally look at these artifacts and see what they look like from anywhere in the world. It's been a fantastic development of I would say probably the last decade, I think, is when these have really become broadly available. But all of the links to the resources that Janine has mentioned for you today, all of these books and the online databases, as well as direct links to Jamestown Rediscovery, will be in the show notes for today's episode. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find all of those. Now, Janine, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and I've been told it's the hardest question on our podcast, but it's what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Oh man, that is definitely the hardest question. Your other guests are right. I love short stories and anthologies, and I haven't read this since high school, and it was an abridged version. So I think being on a deserted island, presumably for vacation, not being stranded there, it is Canterbury Tales. I think I would like to read the full version of Canterbury Tales because I just really, really liked it. I liked the frame story and might as well revisit it.
I mean, what is a vacation on a beach for if you're not diving into the book you've always wanted to explore more fully? I think that's an excellent choice for sure. Yes. And I love that you come in with this optimism of assuming that you're on vacation as opposed to being stranded. And I think that's great too. That works in your favor.
It was not specified in the question.
It wasn't. You're absolutely right. And that's why I think it's so great. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I just actually submitted a paper for publication on our 17th century buttons. So done with that. But we always have a lot of things going on, both in the organization and in total, but also the collections department. And one of our main projects is working on the reference collection, which is essentially designed to show the depth and breadth of the collection. So we want one example of every unique artifact that has been found. So for something like spangles, we have 3 different types. Each of those would be a reference. But every artifact type looks different. It could be based on manufacture, it could be shape, decoration, function, etc. And my current project is our arms and armor collection. So that is vast. It will take me many years. And I'm kind of starting with the weaponry side of things. So edge weaponry, pole arms, projectiles, artillery, firearms. So on Friday, I am going to start on our musket rest. So very excited about that.
Fantastic. What great fun that is. I'll look forward to seeing all that you uncover with those projects. Thank you so much, Janine Johnson, for being here this week and taking us through the history of spangles and helping us understand the references to both spangles and o's that we see in Shakespeare's plays and being able to put a history visual through archaeology in this case, to exactly what that means. We really appreciate you being here to take the time to share this history with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to your listeners. If anyone is ever in the historic Triangle area of Williamsburg, Virginia, please do come visit historic Jamestown and see all of these wonderful artifacts.
We would love to come and visit. We'll make sure to put links in the show notes for where you can do that. Thanks again. All of the resources we've talked about in the show today, including more information on our guest, Janine Johnson, along with clickable links to the resources she recommends that you check out if you want to learn more about spangles and o's and sequins and glitter from Shakespeare's lifetime, along with more information on Jamestown rediscovery, how you can visit and see the artifacts for yourself, as well as some of those online databases where you can visit some of the clothing history and artifacts right from your home, are all packed into the show notes for today's episode. All of these things can be found at CassidyCash.com/episode 428. And if you'd like to go even further behind the scenes of the show and see some of the artifacts that Janine was mentioning for you today, you can see those inside That Shakespeare Society. On our companion page, just click the button for That Shakespeare Society to access all the extras related to today's conversation. Again, the URL for all these things is CassidyCash.com/episode 428. That's CassidyCash.com/EP428. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.